Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Recently, Archon Studio sent me 2 sets of their Dungeons Lasers terrain to review, and I have already posted videos reviewing those sets in depth. But today, we're going to take a look at painting the Dwarven Mine set. And if you look at the front cover of the box, you can see there is a beautiful professionally painted set right there. And I want to try and emulate the look of that set, but in a much quicker way. I think it's quite important to be able to get terrain painted up and on the table as quickly as possible, so you can focus more on playing your games and having your adventures. So we're going to try and do this as quickly as we possibly can, while still getting some good results. And I have to say in advance, I'm actually really happy with how this set turned out. I think I did a better job on these than I did on the Abomination Vaults, which I painted in a previous video. But anyway, each of these boxes comes with 6 identical sets of terrain. You get walls, doors and floors, and then you get some other accessories like lamps. And to get started, I have sprayed all of the frames with Chaos Black, and I've kept all the components attached to the frames at this stage. I find this is much easier than cutting out all the terrain and then spraying it afterwards. But once the Chaos Black is dry, it's a case of cutting all of the components out, but you will have little marks where the frames were attached, and you will need to go back with some black and just paint over those marks. But once you've done that and everything is dry, you can actually start painting. And to begin with, I'm using Steel Legion Drab, and what I'm doing is an overbrush. It's a bit like a dry brush, but you have a lot more paint on your brush, but you're still whipping it across the surface of the miniature, so you're hitting all of the raised details, but you are leaving the Chaos Black in all of the recesses. This is a really quick and effective way to get colour all over the miniature without losing detail. Next, I'm switching to Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to apply this to all of the wooden areas, and that's going to enrich the brown of the wood, and it's also going to bring out all of the lovely wood texture. So we want a good coat of Agrax over all of that wood to make sure all of those details really pop. I'm not going to put the Agrax over the metal end caps. There are 2 caps at each end of the walls, and I'm also not putting it over all of the stonework. However, I am going to apply Agrax into the recesses between the stones. That's just going to make all of the stones pop just a little bit more. And you don't have to be too fussy about this, just get the shade on quickly. Next, I'm switching to Xandri Dust, and this time we are going to do a dry brush. So I've got a really big brush, I'm putting some paint on that brush, I'm wiping almost all of the paint back off, and then I'm doing a heavy dry brush over everything. And I should point out that what I'm doing on the walls, I'm also going to be doing on the floors as well. So the floors have already had Steel Legion Drab applied, and then I'm going to dry brush them with the Xandri Dust as well. And when I'm doing the floors, it's big swirling motions. I want big circular motions, and it's really going to pick out all of the stonework. And there's a really nice effect of standing water on these floor tiles as well, and it will pick out all of those little ripples around the stones. You can see as the brushwork is going on, those details are just getting more and more evident. Next up, I'm switching to Screaming Skull, and what I'm doing now is a targeted dry brush just over the stonework, because the wooden areas are done, but we want the stonework to be a different colour, we want it to be a much lighter colour. So I've got the smallest dry brush I own, and I am just dry brushing just the stonework, trying not to hit the wood areas. If you hit the wood in a few areas, it's not the end of the world, because that's just going to come across as variations in the colour of the wood, but as much as possible you want to try and focus this just on the stones. And you want to keep going, keep applying it until those stones are really, really bold. All of the nice texture on those stones has really come out. And again, we're going to do the same thing on the floor, but with a bigger dry brush, because we don't need to worry about hitting any wooden elements on these floor tiles. So again, big swirling motions, making sure we hit the edges of all of those stones and all of those little stones that are in the standing water. And once we're done with that, most of our dry brushing is over for this stuff. So next, I'm switching to Ethonian Camo shade, and what I'm doing here is I'm applying it to that standing water. I want the standing water to be a dank green colour. I want it to look like it has been stood in a cave for a long time. It's got some algae in there, it's got some slime in there. It's generally just unpleasant surface water. And a very thin coat of Ethonian camo shade will do that quite nicely. And of course, because it is translucent, you are still seeing some of that pattern and shading from the dry brushing underneath. So all of the ripples are still evident. There are still variations in the colour. And I think this is just a really nice quick way of giving that sense that there is standing water there. I don't do it in this video, but you can actually go a bit further with this. You could put down some water effect over the water areas, or maybe use a gloss varnish to make it look shiny. But like I say, I didn't do that. I didn't think it was necessary to take that extra step. I'm just trying to get this stuff done quickly. And of course, if you don't want to go with green, if you want to do a different colour, you can do that as well. Whatever you think would look good in your dank mine. And in fact, you don't need to put any colour down there at all. You could just leave it. Next up is lead belcher, and we're going to thin that lead belcher down and we're going to apply it to those metal caps that I mentioned earlier. There are 2 caps at the ends of each of the wall sections, and I'm just going to apply it over there. There are rivets in the caps, and I'm being careful not to paint the lead belcher into the recesses around those caps because I'm not doing any more dry brushing or washes on these metal areas. I want them to be quite bright, but I obviously don't want to lose that detail. So just being careful that when we paint those circles, we don't paint into the recesses. And we also need to put some lead belcher on the lanterns that are attached to the support beams. You get 1 support beam on each of the 6 frames. And they have been painted up exactly the same way as everything else so far. And now we're painting the lantern with the lead belcher. While that is drying, we're going to paint the torches. The wooden parts of the torches again have been painted the same way as all of the other wood that you've seen in this video, but now we've got some matte white and we're just applying this to the part of the torch that would be lit. We just want to make sure we've completely covered our Chaos Black primer. And we're also going to stipple that onto the lantern that is hanging on the support beam, and at the moment that is going to look ghastly, but hopefully by the end of this, it won't. Next is Flash Gets Yellow, and I'm stippling this on the white area of the torch. I want a lot of the white to show through, but I want to make sure there's some yellow all over the top of that. And again, doing the same thing on the lantern. Then I'm switching to Evil Sun Scarlet, doing the same thing again, but it's a much lighter stippling this time. If you watched my video on painting the Abomination Vaults, I did exactly the same process for the torches in that set as well. And of course, we mustn't forget to also put some red on this lantern. Finally, for the torches, we're using some Abaddon Black, just a very, very light dry brush just on the top, just to give that sense of the carbon burning off from the fire. I'm now going back to my lead belcher, I'm thinning it down and I'm reapplying it to the lantern, and I'm going to paint over the top and the bottom of the lantern, and I'm going to paint on the front edges of the grid work that's on the lantern. So the painting that I've done for the actual light will still be on the sides of the metal areas, but it won't be on the front facing areas of the metal, if that makes sense. And I wasn't quite happy with how that was looking, so I've now got some red tone from Army Painter here. I'm just applying a small amount of that, just to try and tie those colours together a little bit more. And after I'd done that, I still wasn't happy, so I got some Cassandora Yellow, which is a really nice bright shade, and I've just applied some of that in there as well. And it's starting to get a warm glow, which is what I'm after, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm happy enough. The last thing to deal with are the doors, so we're going to use Mournfang Brown, and again we're doing an overbrush, so as before we have more paint on our brush than if we were doing a dry brush, but not so much that we're going to obscure the detail in the door. And when that's dry, we're going to do an overbrush with Xandru Dust on the little slat in the door. It's not really necessary, it could all be the same wood colour if you want, but on the actual cover art they have a different wood tone there, so I did the same thing. And then it's back to lead belcher to paint the hinges and also the door handles. And again, the aim here when applying the lead belcher is not to obscure any of the recessed details, because I'm not going to be putting any more washes on this metal. I want it to match up with the same colour hue as those end caps on the walls. And of course I just need to be careful not to get it over the wood. The final thing we need to do is get some Agrax Earthshade, and the Agrax Earthshade is going to go all over the wood areas, and it will go around the metal areas. It will pull up against the edges of the metal areas and just make those metal areas pop just a little bit more, and of course it will enrich the wooden colour of the door and will bring out all of that detail. And with that done, painting is finished. The next thing to do is to wait for it to dry completely, then give everything a coat of anti-shine. And then when that is dry, we can assemble it. And just as a reminder, here is the front cover of the Dwarven Mine set. This is the professionally finished job. This is what I was attempting to emulate in a quick and easy manner, and this is what I have ended up with. This is the contents of one of the 6 frames, so you will get 6 times this amount of content in the box. And I'm pretty happy with how that has turned out. The wooden beam that has the lantern attached to it, that is a separate element. That's not attached to anything, so you can just put those in if you want them, or just take them out. If you're playing a game, you can put them in to begin with, move them out of the way if they're just getting in the way of what you're trying to do. But then with that moved aside, you can see we have all of the walls attached, we have the door attached, and we have the 2 torches in the walls. I'm quite happy with how the standing water came out. The doors in these sets do open. You can see the door is hinged open there. My one minor complaint about these sets is all of the components fit together quite tightly. So once you have painted the doors, the hinges are very, very stiff, and over time the paint on the hinges is going to rub off if you keep opening and closing those doors. There's not really a lot that can be done about that. Regardless, I'm really happy with how the walls turned out. I really like the way that the stones stand out from the wood, and I think that is a decent standard for anybody's tabletop if they're just looking to get terrain on the table quickly. And that brings us to the end of the video. I do of course have to thank Archon Studio again for sending these sets in for review. I have included links in the video description below to their official site, so you can go and check this stuff out in more detail if you want to. I also have to thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.